Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chof Tes Amud Aleph. Sorry, Daf Chof Ches Amud Beis. 5 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah states that in the early morning, the Sgan HaKohanim tells the Kohanim to go on the rooftop to determine if Zman HaShchita has arrived. The Mishnah asks, why was that necessary? To which the Mishnah explained, because of an incident that occurred. They once thought that it was indeed the daytime, when it's permissible to then bring the carbon Tomishal Shachar. But indeed it was still night, where it's prohibited. They thought they saw the light of the sun, but indeed it was the light of the moon. Ask the Gemara, Umi Michlif, why would we think that there's a switch? Why would we make a mistake and think that the light that we're seeing is the light of the sun? Hooray, the two different ways the light shines, both from the sun and from the moon. Ask the Gemara. Vatanya Rabbi Oimer, Eino doime timur shel levana, the timur shel chama. The light that comes out as a result of the sun differs from the light that results from the moon. Timur shel levana metamer va'oile kemakil. The light that comes from the moon, that comes out like a straight beam. Whereas Timur Shel Chama maftzia lekan or lekan. Whereas the light from the sun, that spreads out from here to there. Answers the Gemara, Tanu Rabbi Yishmael, Yoim ha'ma'unon haya umaftzia lekan or lekan. Because it was a cloudy day, therefore, when there are different areas within the cloud that the light goes through, so then that light also goes and spreads out. So therefore, there was a mistake that was made, thinking that it was the sunlight, but it was indeed the moonlight. Amar Papa makes the following observation based on this. Shmamina yoima deiba kule shimsha. We can derive from this, when it comes to a day that is cloudy, then it's all shimsha, meaning to say you can't find shade. Because anytime there's places in the clouds, again, that there are holes that the light will go through, then there'll be light throughout the area, throughout the day, without all the places, without being a shadow. Lamai nafka mina, asked the Gemara, what would make a difference if it's such a cloudy day? And therefore, there's a concern that there's yoima, that's kule shimsha, lishtuche aros. One nafka mina be if you want to dry aros, hides. So then, that's the time that will cause it to be dried out pretty easily. Inami, like the Darish Rava, like Rava expounded. Isha loy talush loy bechama loy chamichama. A woman, when she's then baking matzahs, shall not bake matzahs in such a day because of the heat of the sun, as well as even using the water that was heated up by the sun, because it could lead to chametz. Omar Rav Nachman, zuhama de shimsha, kashim shimsha. The zuhama, the heat that results from the shemesh, we call zuhama the shimsha. That heat on a cloudy day is even more kosher than a regular day of the sun. The simonach dana de chala. The simon is if you have a jar with vinegar. So that jar contains the vinegar, and the vinegar maintains its strong potency. However, if a small hole is made, then the strength of that potency comes out from that one hole, even stronger than if it was open before in a bigger way. So too over here, since there's a hole in the cloud, the light that shines forth, that heat is even more than the regular sun. Shviri de shimshi kosher meshimsha. The rays of the sun cause a person to become blinded even more than from the sun itself. The simanach dilfa. The sign, the simon is dilfa. When you have drops that are dropping on a person of water and it's incessant, that's even more kosher than if you have all the water at once. Top of Chof Tes Amud Aleph. Hiyahure aveira kosher me aveira. The thoughts of improper behavior, that itself causes a person's mind to be constantly thinking, and that's where his thoughts, that's where he's at, that's even more difficult than the Avera itself, because that itself not only causes his mind to be completely always diverted, but also on a physical level, Rashi points out, that it also machish his bosar, causes a weakening of his bosar, of his body. V'simonach reicha de bistro, just as when one smells the fragrance of roasted meat, that has more of a taiva that a person desires than when he eats the meat itself. So too the Hirvura Aveira causes a greater amount of taiva for that person than the Aveira itself. Shili takaita kashim idkaita. The end of the summer is even more difficult in terms of the strength of the heat than the summer. Why? We're going to explain the simonach tanur shgira. When you have a heated up oven that's been heated up already a couple times during the day, when you now reheat it, so it already then maintains its heat from before to some extent, and therefore becomes even hotter. So too when it comes to the end of the summer, after a hot summer, so the environment already has the heat, and when it then becomes a little bit more hot from the end of the summer, then it already heats up even further. Ishta the sisva kasha medekaita, the high fever of the winter, that is more difficult than a high fever during the summer. Simonach tanura karira. The simon is if you have a cold oven. So that cold oven requires a lot of wood to heat it up. So too, in a cold day, on a cold winter's day, when a person has high fever, then his body has to work very hard to then develop such a high fever. Masha'enken when it's a hot day. When one learns something that's old and forgets that learning, it's more difficult to relearn something than learn something anew. The simonach tina bartina. The simon is if you have cement and you want to then make cement again from old cement, let's say from a cement wall, you take the pieces and try to then make it so that's cement again. That's more difficult than taking a new and making new cement. Now the Gemara asks, Omar Rabbi Abo, my time with the Rebbe. Rebbe made a chiluk between the Timur Shel Chama and the Timur Shel Levana. The Gemara explained the difference. The Gemara said the Timur Shel Levana, it goes up like a makil. It goes up like a beam. Whereas the Timur of the sun, so that goes ahead and spreads out. It gets diffused. So what is the Gemara asking? Elamai, the Gemara wants to find a source. My time with the Rebbe. Answers the Gemara, the pasuk says that, talking about ayeles hashachar, ma ayola, just as a female deer, zu karnea maftsilois, its horns spread out, lekanu lekan, af shachar ze maftzil lekanu lekan. So to the morning sunlight, it also spreads out and gets diffused. Rabbi Zeira, lama nimshula Esther le Ayola. Why is Esther in Maseches Megillah compared to the Ayola? Loy malacha, to teach you, ma Ayola rachamot tsar v'chaviva al baila. Just as the Ayola, her rechem is narrow and causes her to be chaviva on her baila, on her mate. Kol shov v'shov v'shov v'shana, kishav v'shana. Each and every time, like the first time. So too, Esther was beloved to Achashverosh all the time, just as like in the beginning. Why is Esther compared to the Shachar? It says Ayeles HaShachar. Loy malacha, to teach you, Ma Shachar, just as the morning. Soif Kol HaLayla is at the end of the night. Af Esther, Sof Kol HaNisim, so too Esther is at the end of all of the Nisim. Ask the Gemara, V'ha'ika Chanukah, the open miracles of Chanukah took place after Esther. Says the Gemara, Nitna Lichtov Ka'amrinon. That what we're talking about is that opinion that we're saying was Megillas Esther as a book of Tanakh. That was when the end of the miracles ended. The Gemara says, Hanicha leman da'omer Esther nitna likosef. That's very good according to that opinion that says that Megillas Esther was one of the Chaf Dalis Sfarim. The nafkamina is that one cannot you can't touch the Sefer if with Yadayim that's Tuma. That's Metamid Yadayim. So ask the Gemara, that's very good according to that opinion that says Megillas Esther was a Sefer of Tanakh. Elaman da'omer Esther lo nitna likosef. But according to the other opinion, Ma'ika lemeimar. Why are you saying that Esther was a Soif Kola Nisim when you have Hanukkah afterwards? Gemara says, Mukim lo kirabi Binyamin ben Yafis. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Name Rabbi Elazar. Amar Rabbi Binyamin ben Yafis. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Lama nimshalo. Lama nimshalu tfilos shel tzadikim ka'ayala. Why are the tfilos of the tzadikim compared to the ayala? Loi malach. Ma ayala zu. It's just as the ayala, so long as she grows, her horns also grow and spread out. So too, the tzaddikim, so long as their tefillas continue and they increase, so too they'll be then heard as a result. So here, the word shachar, the reason why Esther is compared to the shachar is not the morning, but rather shachar in the words tefillah. Shachar we find in places that shachar is tefillah. So just as the shachar is that which we're saying the ayala spreads forth, so to the shachar, the ayelas shachar is also compared to the fact that the tefillos, including Esther Hamalka, where the tefillos that are nisrabe, the tefillos are nishmas. The Mishnah has stated shachtu es hatamid. They shechted the carbon tamid. Ask the Gemara, well, if you have the Mishnah that states that they, Sgan HaKayanim, he declared to the Kayan to go up to the rooftop and determine if the morning has arrived, to be shechet the carbon tamid. Then the Mishnah goes on to say that, why do they have to do this? Because of an incident that took place, that they thought it was the sunlight, but indeed it was the moonlight. And then the Mishnah goes on to say they brought the Kohen Gadol down to the Beis HaTfilah. So the Gemara wants to understand this. Amos, when did this take place? When did this take place, this incident that they made a mistake and thought that it was indeed the daylight of the sun and not the light from the moon? If you're going to tell me you're talking about for the rest of the year, Lav Dafka on Yom Kippurim, then Lo Sagi de Lav Kohen Gadol, then why is that necessary to then speak about a Kohen Gadol that's talking about any Kohen throughout the rest of the year who would then bring the carbon Tamid Shel Shachar? Ella b'Yom Kippurim, rather must be, we're talking about Yom Kippurim because we're talking about the Avodah, only the Kohen Gadol can perform. So the Gemara asks, Ma'or Lavana mi'ika, where is there going to be the Ma'or Lavan that comes out on the eastern horizon on the 10th of Tishrei? That would only be able to be a possibility at the end of the month. Answers the Gemara, Hachika Omar. You're right. This is what the Mishnah is saying. Uviyoim HaKippurim ki Omar Borak Bar Koi. And on Yom Kippurim, when they declared that it's shining, that means to say the beginning of the light is shining, then Haridu, that's the first part of the Mishnah, and then parenthetically is the rest of the part of the Mishnah that talks about the incident that occurred, that they made a mistake, whereby that's the reason why they have to send somebody on the rooftop in the first place. But now the Mishnah goes back to what it was saying in the beginning. Once it's declared on Yom Kippurim that in the morning that the sun is shining, and it's time for the shchitas of the Kohen Tamid Shel Shachar, then Haridu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTfilah. Then they bring down the Kohen Gadol to the Beis HaTfilah. He is then Toivel, and then he does the avodah of the Kohen Tamid Shel Shachar.